Hello there, welcome back to the Codex. So today I wanted to do a video kind of conceptually just going over why exactly the melee influence arcane is so incredibly dominant and by far the best melee arcane in the game, at least for the majority of content that we actually do. Let's go ahead and hop into a build here. I chose just a random weapon to test this on, and that's the Coda Haruto. It's a decent weapon. It's a code weapon, so you can pick a free Coda element. It has fine base stats, the crit's okay, the status is okay, especially with Weeping Wounds and Blood Rush and all that. But first of all, before we talk about the build here, let's talk about what do we normally do in Warframe. Think about missions like survivals, think about disruptions, think about exterminates. There's so many missions in the game where essentially the core objective of the mission, or at least the kind of kills that you partake in while you're in a mission, involves killing lots and lots of enemies, just absolute hordes of enemies, especially in, like I said, survival missions. The literal goal of those missions is just to kill as many enemies as you possibly can, because that's all you can do in that mission. The more enemies that you kill, the more air that you drop to keep yourself alive, because if you hit 0% air, you die. So if that's your only goal, you might kill as many enemies as you possibly can, not only to keep your air up, because if you kill 100 guys a minute instead of 50, then you potentially get twice as many resources. So it's also literally more rewarding to kill more enemies per minute because you get more drops. So with that in mind, let's think about and discuss the kind of build we're putting together here. So melee exposure is an arcane that you might automatically assume, and to be honest, rightfully so, is a very good arcane. This gives you up to 240% basically free corrosive damage. This says, on ability cast, gain 60% corrosive damage on melee strikes for 25 seconds, stacks up to 240%. So this is as if you put a 240% corrosive damage mod on your weapon. Not only is this a ton of raw damage, but since this is added as already pre-combined corrosive damage, that means that you can do typically impossible elemental combinations, like for example viral and corrosive, which typically you can't mod onto a weapon because both viral and corrosive use the toxin damage type, making that elemental combination normally impossible on most weapons. So on the Coda Haruto here, we have free corrosive for melee exposure, we're modded for viral, and we have magnetic that I've chosen for the valence element. So we have up to 80% armor stripping from corrosive, along with it being a huge base damage value, up to a 4.25x damage multiplier to health from viral, and up to a 4.25x damage multiplier to shields and overguard. So this build appears to have basically everything. It's buffs on top of buffs on top of buffs, and we have plenty of crit between Blood Rush and Galvanized Steel, plenty of status chance with Weeping Wounds, range with Prime Reach. We just have a wide spread of buffs on this build. So let's go ahead and go kill these level 230 fully armored corrupted heavy gunners with steel path modifiers here. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, let's melee these guys here. We got to build up our combo counter, of course, and as we build up more and more combo, we go into orange crits and then into red crits, and we'll start doing a lot more damage. Now let's go ahead and also cast some abilities here so that I can activate the 240% corrosive damage, so I don't forget about that. And now we have all of our buffs fully stacked up. We're at 12x combo, and we have our 240% extra corrosive damage. And as you can see, the single target damage against each individual person it's fine. It's not bad. Guys die actually fairly quickly. You can see that they go from full health to no health in a matter of less than a second a lot of the time. So this absolutely destroys enemy after enemy. But therein lies the problem. We're playing Warframe, and going enemy by enemy is not really how we like to do things. It's not very efficient if your goal is to kill hundreds of guys per minute. So let's go ahead and take a look at a different build. So let's go ahead and reopen the Haruto here. So instead of this massively multi-buffing viral procs, magnetic procs, corrosive procs build, let's go over to a pure electric build. Let me change my valence override to electric. So the only element we have on here is electricity, and we switched over to the arcane melee influence. This says on melee electricity status, 20% chance for elemental melee status effects to apply to enemies within 20 meters for 18 seconds. Cannot refresh while active. So this build will do less damage to every person that I hit, because for one, I'm using electric and we're fighting Orokin enemies. Orokin are not weak to electric. They were weak to the viral we had on the other build. Also, since we're only as electric, we don't have the viral damage multiplier to health. We don't have the corrosive armor strip, and if they were Xmas enemies, we were also missing the magnetic buff against Xmas overguard, or if the enemy had shields, the buff against shields. So we lost technically a whole lot of buffs, and we switched from condition overload to prime pressure point. Conditional overload on this build has up to 480% base damage, because this is 5 different status effects, but since one of them was magnetic, and magnetic can also proc electric, that's up to 6 status effects, which means that conditional overload on the build that we first tested is up to 480% base damage. We had to switch to prime pressure point on this build because melee influence doesn't benefit from conditional overload, so we also theoretically lost over half of our maximum potential base damage. We lost all the multipliers against the enemies. So what did we really gain here? Well, I'll show you what we gained. The problem is that we do too much damage. We don't need all of the damage that we have from the previous build. What we need to do is lower our damage and instead distribute our total damage across multiple enemies around us, because as opposed to wanting to overkill one enemy super fast, we want to kill all of the enemies faster. Now we're at fully stacked up 12x combat here. Look, watch this. Watch how fast this entire crowd dies. Do a few hits in here, and everyone just explodes. That is how quickly that we killed 20 guys. So you can imagine in survival, for example, instead of going from enemy to enemy to enemy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kills, you kill one guy, and then 15 guys around you in a circle explode. You go kill the next guy, another 10, 20 guys around you explode. This is how you go from getting, for example, 50 kills a minute to 150 kills per minute. This is the quote-unquote problem in Warframe. Like I said, we do too much damage. So all of these arcanes that are technically really good, like melee exposure, giving us 240% extra corrosive damage, or duplicate, letting us hit twice, or any of these other number of damage increasing arcanes that basically only increase our damage against one person, they don't matter if you're already doing enough damage to just about instantly kill that person anyway. So we would rather sacrifice, technically quote-unquote sacrifice that damage, and hit everybody around us instead and kill the whole crowd faster, kill the whole room faster. I would much rather do 500,000 damage to 20 guys in one hit than to do 1.5 million damage to only one guy. It just makes sense. I want to kill more enemies per minute in a horde shooter game. So there we go. That's the melee influence problem or explanation, whatever you want to call it. I have obviously mixed opinions on the whole situation. You guys can let me know down below. I didn't really want to weigh in and say like, oh, melee influence should be nerfed or other things should be buffed or whatnot. I'm not, necessarily taking a stance here. I more so just wanted to, from an educational standpoint, explain why melee influence from a mathematical standpoint and from a practical standpoint is so dominant. But if you guys have any, super hardcore opinions like, remove melee influence from the game or buff every other arcane to be just as good as it, you can let me know down below in the comments. I'm very interested in those kind of opinions, and who knows, maybe DE will finally make some changes that you guys want. So anyways, hopefully it was entertaining, hopefully it was educational, and I will see you guys in the next one.